When you think about the American Revolution, what do you see? You probably see George Washington standing heroically in a boat crossing the icy Delaware River. You see brave Minutemen in tri-cornered hats hiding behind stone walls. You see the flash of silver bayonets and hear the thunder of cannons at Yorktown. We like our history to be about great men, grand ideas, and brilliant military maneuvers. But what if I told you that the most important soldier in the war for American independence was not a man at all? What if the true hero of the revolution was a tiny, buzzing, blood-sucking vampire only a few millimeters long? This is not a conspiracy theory. This is biological reality. Today, we are going to look at how a microscopic parasite and its winged chariot managed to do what the Continental Army often could not. We are going to see how an insect defeated the most powerful empire on the face of the earth. We are talking about the mosquito. Specifically, a lady called Anopheles quadrimaculatus. She does not care about liberty. She does not care about taxes on tea. She just wants your blood. And in the late 1770s, she decided she liked British blood the best. To understand how a bug changed the map of the world, we have to go back to 1778. At this point, the war had been grinding on for 3 long years. In the north, it was a stalemate. The British were tired. The politicians in London were complaining about the cost. They needed a win, and they needed it fast. So, the British Commander-in-Chief, Sir Henry Clinton, came up with a new plan. It was called the Southern Strategy. The logic seemed perfect on paper. The British believed that the American South was teeming with loyalists. They thought if they just showed up in places like Georgia and South Carolina, thousands of people would flock to the British flag. They would take the South, use it as a base, and then squeeze George Washington and his rebels from both sides. It was a classic pincer move. In 1780, General Charles Cornwallis began his march through the American South. He was a tough, capable general leading some of the finest professional soldiers in the world. These were the Redcoats. They were disciplined. They were well-fed. They were terrifying. But as they marched into the humid lowlands of the Carolinas, they were walking into a biological trap that they did not even know existed. The American South back then was not the land of manicured suburbs and air-conditioned malls we know today. It was a world of dark, stagnant swamps, slow-moving rivers, and massive rice plantations. And it was hot, oppressively, soul-crushingly hot. For a soldier from the cool, rainy hills of Scotland or the temperate meadows of England, it felt like landing on another planet. And in that heat, the mosquitoes were waiting. They were everywhere. They were thick clouds that filled the air. They crawled into ears and eyes. They bit through woolen uniforms. To the British, they were a nuisance, an annoyance, something to be slapped away while they looked for the rebels. But these were not just annoying bugs. They were carrying a passenger, a microscopic parasite called malaria. Now here is where the story gets really interesting. Why did the mosquitoes affect the British so much more than the Americans? After all, everyone was getting bitten. This is the secret weapon of the revolution: immunity. Malaria had been in the American South for decades. It had been brought over during the biological Big Bang we call the Columbian Exchange. Because it had been there so long, the people living in the South had developed what scientists call acquired immunity. If you were a rebel militiaman born in the swamps of South Carolina, you had probably caught malaria 3 or 4 times by the time you were 20. You did not like it, but your body knew how to fight it. You might get a headache or a fever, but you could still pick up your rifle and march. But the British, they were fresh meat. They were what doctors call a non-immune population. For a British soldier, the first time that mosquito needle hit his skin, it was a death sentence or a career ender. When malaria hits someone with no immunity, it is not just a fever. It is a total systems collapse. You get bone-shaking chills. Your temperature spikes so high you start to hallucinate. Your spleen swells. Your red blood cells explode. You become so weak you cannot even hold a spoon, let alone a 10-pound musket. By the time Cornwallis reached the heart of the Carolinas, his army was literally rotting from the inside out. Historians have dug through the old medical records, and the numbers are staggering. At any given time in the Southern campaign, up to half of the British army was unfit for duty because of the shakes. Cornwallis would look at his maps and plan a battle, only to realize he did not have enough men who could actually stand up. The rebels, led by a brilliant general named Nathaniel Greene, understood this. Greene was a smart man. He knew he could not beat Cornwallis in a fair fight, so he chose not to fight fairly. He led the British on a wild goose chase through the hottest, swampiest, most mosquito-infested parts of the South. He would retreat, and the British would follow, getting deeper and deeper into the fever zone. It was biological guerrilla warfare. Cornwall ISS thought he was chasing a retreating army. In reality, he was being led into a giant petri dish. Every step his soldiers took through a swamp was a victory for the Americans. Every night they spent camping near a stagnant pond was like 1,000 invisible bullets being fired into their camp. The climax of this nightmare happened at Yorktown in 1781. This is the battle we all learn about in school. The French Navy blocks the sea. Washington surrounds the land. Cornwall ESC surrenders, and the United States is born. It sounds like a perfect military victory. But let us look at the numbers. When Cornwall ES moved his army to Yorktown, he chose a spot on the tip of a peninsula. It was surrounded by water and marshes. To a general, it looked like a defensible position. To a Mosquito, it looked like the ultimate buffet. By the time the final siege of Yorktown began, the British Army was a shadow of its former self. Cornwall ES had about 7,700 men under his command. But on the day of the battle, only about 3,800 of them were healthy enough to stand in the trenches. The rest were lying in tents, shaking with fever, covered in cold sweat, and praying for death. Imagine you are Cornwall IS. You look at your battlements. You see half your army is missing. You are not being beaten by Washington's genius. You are being eaten by the air itself. The British did not just lose because of French ships or American courage. They lost because they were physically incapable of fighting back. The Mosquito had cleared the way for the American victory. There is a famous quote from the historian John McNeill. He said that the Anopheles quadrimaculatus Mosquito stood head and shoulders above all the other founding fathers. It is a joke, but it is also a profound truth. Without the Mosquito, the British Southern strategy probably would have worked. They would have crushed the southern colonies, kept their base of operations, and the American Revolution might have ended as a minor footnote in the history of the British Empire. And here is the irony. The malaria that defeated the British was not an American native. It was a transplant. It was something the Europeans and Africans had brought to the New World years before. The British were essentially being destroyed by a monster they had helped create and transport across the ocean. It was biological blowback on a massive scale. But the influence of the Mosquito did not stop in 1781. This little bug actually helped draw the map of the United States. Have you ever noticed that for a long time? The North and the South in America felt like two different countries? A lot of that comes down to biology. Malaria thrived in the South, but it could not get a foothold in the colder North. This created a biological border. It shaped the labor systems. It shaped the economy. It shaped the culture. It decided where people could live and where they would die. The Mosquito was the primary architect of the American landscape for over 200 years. When we look back at history, we like to think we are in control. We like to think that our ideas about freedom, democracy, and rights are what drive the world forward. And they're important. Do not get me wrong. George Washington was a great leader. The soldiers at Yorktown were incredibly brave. But history is not just about human choices. It is about the environment we live in. It is about the germs we carry. It is about the insects that hunt us while we sleep. The story of the American Revolution is a story of a biological Big Bang. It is the story of how the tiny creatures from the Columbian Exchange changed the fate of empires. The next time you're outside on a summer evening and you hear that high-pitched buzz near your ear, do not just swat it away. Take a moment to think about the lady with the long name. Think about how she brought an empire to its knees. Think about how she stood silently behind the men who signed the Declaration of Independence. The American Mosquito did not care about the Stamp Act. She did not care about the Boston Tea Party. But she did more to secure the independence of the United States than almost any other soldier in the field. She was the secret weapon that London never saw coming. The lesson here is simple: never underestimate the small things. Wars are not just won with big cannons and loud speeches. Sometimes they are won in the blood. Sometimes they are won by the silent passengers who have been riding alongside us since the beginning of time. So, here is to the invisible army. Here is to the tiny veteran of Yorktown. Here is to the Mosquito that made America possible. It is a bit weird, a bit gross, and a little bit funny, but that is the thing about history. It is never as clean as the pictures in the textbooks. It is messy, it is humid, and it is full of surprises. Stay curious, stay informed, and whatever you do, do not forget the bug spray. Because even today, the tiniest creatures are still out there quietly deciding the future of our world, one bite at a time. History is still being written, and a lot of it is being written by things we cannot even see. We live in the world that the Mosquito built. We just happen to be the ones telling the story. Until next time, keep looking past the heroes and the statues, and start looking at the world under your feet and the air around your head. The real story is often much smaller and much stranger than you ever imagined. See you in the next mystery.